The knock at midnight. The heater's low hum was the only sound in Daniel Crow's cabin. Outside, the blizzard howled like a living thing, snow grains rattling against the steel shutters. On nights like this, nothing stirred on Kepler 6b's northern frontier. Not man, not beast. Anyone with sense stayed indoors. Daniel set down his mug of bitter recaf and leaned back in his chair, eyes flicking over the diagnostic feed from the geothermal station. Output steady, pressure nominal. Another long, uneventful night. Then came the knock. It wasn't the timid tap of a neighbor checking in, nor the echoing slam of wind catching loose paneling. This was deliberate. 3 heavy raps, spaced just far enough apart to be unsettling. Daniel's first thought, no one should be out here in this weather. His second, trouble. He reached for the sidearm hanging on the wall and padded to the door. The knock came again, louder this time, accompanied by a muffled voice, deep, strange, struggling to form words through the wind. "Human, please." He froze. The accent was wrong for a colonist, consonants thick and rounded. The kind of sound he'd only heard in tense council meetings between humans and the Thalari, the native species of this frozen world. Opening the door without checking would be stupid, but leaving someone to freeze in -40 wind chill, that wasn't something he could stomach. Daniel slid back the viewing slit. Snow swirled into the gap, stinging his eyes. A tall figure loomed in the storm, fair-mantled, eyes crusting on the edges of its face. 2 smaller shapes clung to her legs, eyes wide, faces half-hidden in thick scarves. The woman, if Thalari had women, lifted her head. Pale amber eyes locked on his. "My children need father," she said haltingly. Her breath steamed in the frigid air. "Please, warm bed." Daniel blinked. The words were broken, mismatched in human grammar, but the plea was unmistakable. Her fur was matted with snow, the young clinging to her trembling. They wouldn't last long out here. Still, every instinct screamed caution. The Thalari weren't enemies anymore, not officially, but they weren't exactly friends. And he'd heard enough stories about desperate aliens luring humans into traps. But the children, one with a frostbitten E-tip, the other coughing in the cold, tipped the balance. Daniel disengaged the locks and swung the door wide. "Get in. Quick." They shuffled inside, the storm's roar briefly filling the room before he slammed the door shut and sealed it. The sudden quiet was almost shocking. The alien woman stood tall even indoors, her fur cloak trailing melted snow onto the floor. Her face was distinctly Thalari, high cheek ridges, short muzzle, 2 subtle rows of facial whiskers twitching in the warm air. She knelt to comfort the children, murmuring in a language Daniel didn't understand. He holstered his pistol but kept it close. "Sit by the heater," he said, pointing. "Warm yourselves." The woman nodded, guiding her young to the humming unit. They huddled close, small hands, clawed but delicate, stretching toward the warmth. Daniel fetched blankets from his bunk. As he wrapped one around the smallest child, the alien flinched slightly at his touch, then relaxed. Their eyes, an odd green gold, followed him with quiet, wary curiosity. "Name's Daniel," he said, crouching to their level. "This is my place. You're safe here. For now." The woman straightened. "Saarthil," she said, touching her chest. Then, gesturing to the children, "Risha. Tovin." Her voice carried the weight of exhaustion. She swayed slightly, and Daniel realized she was on the edge of collapse. He guided her to the chair by the heater. "What happened to you?" he asked. She hesitated, eyes flicking toward the door as if expecting someone to burst through. "Mate, gone. Clan, no home. Long walk." Daniel knew enough of Thalari culture to piece together the meaning. If her mate had died, tradition dictated she join one of his brothers in marriage. Refusal often meant exile. Exile in this weather was a slow death sentence. "And you came to a human?" he asked. Saarthil's gaze held his, unflinching. "Humans choose family, not forced." She searched for the word. "Better." The heater's glow cast soft shadows across her face. For a moment, Daniel thought he saw not an alien, but another soul battered by loss and cold. Still, questions piled in his mind. How far had she come? Was anyone following? And why him? There were closer settlements, even Falau villages. Unless he caught the flicker of movement outside the shutter, a shadow against shadow, gone in an instant. Could have been snow playing tricks, or it could have been something else. Eat something, he said, moving to the cupboard. He set a tin of reheated stew in front of them. The children dug in with soft chirps of gratitude. Saathil ate slowly, watching him between bites. You ask, she said finally, why you? Daniel didn't deny it. Yeah, why me? She looked down at her hands. Because, you human. You say no when wrong. You protect. That gave him pause. It was one thing to be seen as an engineer, a colonist, a man scraping by. Being seen as a protector, by someone from a species that had once fought his people, was something else entirely. The wind battered the cabin walls. Outside, the temperature dropped another 5 degrees. Somewhere in that frozen dark, he couldn't shake the feeling that eyes were watching. He'd just taken in a widow and her children. If her clan wanted her back, they wouldn't ask nicely. For now, though, the only sound was the soft breathing of 3 thawing refugees and the steady thrum of the heater. Daniel knew sleep wouldn't come easy tonight. Strangers by the fire. The storm didn't let up. Snow scraped against the shutters in a steady hiss, as if the night itself wanted in. The cabin was warm now, but the air still carried that edge of cold that seeped into the bones. Daniel sat across from Saathil at the small steel table. Between them, the empty tin bowls steamed faintly, the scent of stew lingering. The children had curled up on a makeshift bedroll near the heater, fast asleep under blankets far too big for them. Their breathing was slow and even, like they hadn't slept in days. Saathil kept her hands wrapped around the mug of recaf he'd given her, though she'd barely drunk from it. The amber of her eyes flickered in the heater's glow, reflecting more than light, caution, fatigue, and something else Daniel couldn't name. You walked in this, he asked, jerking his chin toward the window where the blizzard clawed at the walls. Yes, she said simply. Her voice was low, the words deliberate, as if she was piecing them together in her head before speaking. From where? Her gaze drifted toward the floor. Stonewater Gorge. 4 days. Daniel's brows rose. The gorge was nearly 50 kilometers north, harsh terrain even in mild weather. 4 days in these conditions. On foot. With 2 children? That wasn't survival. That was punishment. Why not stop in a Falau village? He asked. There are at least 3 between here and the gorge. Her jaw tightened. Clan, not my clan. Outsiders. No help. Daniel leaned back in his chair. He didn't know the intricacies of Falau society, but he knew enough to understand what she meant. No clan meant no rights. An outsider could expect charity only in the form of pity, and pity ran thin in the dead of winter. What happened to your mate? He asked, more gently. She hesitated, then said, mining shaft collapse. Many dead. His brothers want me, want children. I say no. And they threw you out. Her lips pressed together, a faint shiver passing through her fur. Say I dish in a mate's memory. Say I must go to other clan, or die. She looked up, and the quiet steel in her eyes caught him off guard. I choose neither. Daniel studied her. She wasn't just running from hardship. She was running from a cage. And she'd chosen the most dangerous route, the one toward humans. You know, he said slowly, there's a good chance they'll come looking for you. I know, she replied. They already look. That confirmed what he'd suspected last night when he'd seen movement outside. Silence settled between them, broken only by the faint whistle of wind through a gap in the window frame. Daniel patched it absently with a strip of cloth, mind turning over the problem. He'd never taken sides in alien disputes. It wasn't his business. But this was no abstract argument over resources or trade rights. There were 2 small kids sleeping on his floor. He glanced at them. The smaller one, Tovin, had curled his clawed hands under his chin. The older, Risha, was pressed against his side, both of them swallowed by the blanket. Saathil followed his gaze. They tired, she said softly. Always cold. Always afraid. Daniel met her eyes. That's not a way to live. No, she said. Not for them. Not for anyone. She set the mug down and folded her arms, as if bracing herself. I know what humans think of Thalai. We fought. We killed. We take land. Many hate us. But she searched for words, gesturing toward the children. Children have no war. They just want warm bed. Safe place. Daniel exhaled slowly. Warm bed. He was beginning to understand what she meant. It wasn't just about heat. It was about security. Belonging. You picked me for a reason, he said. Yes, she said without hesitation. Humans, you choose. Not like clan. Not forced. It was a simple observation, but it hit him harder than he expected. Out here, survival often meant compromise, bending rules, taking deals you didn't want. The idea that someone saw humanity as a choice, as freedom, felt like a strange sort of compliment. Daniel rubbed his temples. All right, you can stay tonight, but we need to talk about what happens next. Her whiskers twitched. Next? Yeah, if your clan's tracking you, they'll be here sooner or later. And if they're anything like human lawmen, they won't knock twice. Sarathil's eyes darkened, her shoulders tensing. Then we go before they come. Daniel almost laughed, not out of mockery, but disbelief. Go? In this weather? To where? She met his gaze without flinching. Human capital. South. That was nearly 200 kilometers away, across frozen rivers, mountain passes, and stretches of open tundra where the wind could skin a man alive. Not to mention the possibility of Thalai patrols along the way. You'd never make it, he said. She corrected. The heater's hum seemed louder in the silence that followed. Daniel opened his mouth, closed it again. She was asking for more than shelter. She was asking for a shield, and maybe something more permanent. Outside, the wind shifted, and for a moment he thought he heard movement again. Faint, deliberate, not the chaotic swirl of snow. He moved to the shutter, opened the slit. Nothing but white and shadow. He shut it quickly. Get some rest, he said. We'll talk in the morning. Sarathil inclined her head, but didn't argue. She rose, moved to the bedroll, and curled up behind her children. Even in sleep, she kept an arm around each of them, claws resting lightly on the blanket as if to ward off danger. Daniel sat back down at the table, listening to the storm. He knew what the right thing was, get them to safety, even if it meant putting himself in the crosshairs. But knowing and doing were two very different things. He glanced again at the sleeping trio. The word father echoed in his mind, not in the literal sense, but in the way she'd meant it. Someone who stood between the vulnerable and the cold. The wind battered the walls, but inside, for now, the fire held. The clan's shadow. By morning, the storm had passed, leaving the world buried in white. The air outside shimmered with cold, the kind that stabbed at exposed skin within seconds. Daniel stood at the kitchen window, staring out over the frozen expanse. The snow was undisturbed except for a faint, winding trail leading to his cabin, the path Sarathil and her children had taken the night before. His eyes followed it into the tree line, where shadows lingered unnaturally. He narrowed his gaze. One of those shadows shifted. He stepped back from the window slowly, letting the curtain fall into place. Sarathil was at the heater, coaxing the children into eating the warm grain porridge he'd made. Rish's ears twitched toward him, sensing his unease. What is it? Sarathil asked. Daniel kept his voice low. We've got company. Out near the trees. Her face hardened instantly. Clan trackers. You're sure? Yes. She looked at her children, then back to him. They follow. They not stop until they take us. Daniel's stomach knotted. How many? 2, maybe 3. More will come. He cursed it under his breath. Human law on Kepler 6b was clear. Disputes with an alien species were their own business, unless humans were directly attacked. That meant if the trackers came for Sarathil, the colony governor wouldn't lift a finger, not unless Daniel could prove the children were in danger, which they clearly were. All right, he said, thinking fast. They're not getting in here today. But this place isn't a fortress. If they come back with more, we won't be able to hold them off. Sarathil's expression didn't change, but her tail flicked in agitation, a Thalai sign of worry. Then we leave. Now. Daniel glanced at the window. The air shimmered with frost. Even with a snow hauler, it was a brutal trip to the human capital, and they had little fuel. He rubbed his jaw. If we go, we have to do it smart. Not in a straight line. Not on open ground. We use the ridges. Keep out of sight. Her amber eyes met his. You know the way. I know enough. He looked at the children. But they'll slow us down. Sarathil's voice was steady. They will keep up. Why carry them? Daniel believed her. He'd seen the strength in her arms, the way she'd carried both children into the cabin without stumbling. He grabbed a duffel and began stuffing it with essentials, rations, thermal blankets, a toolkit, and his sidearm. He hesitated, then added a short-barreled hunting rifle. Can you use one of these? He asked. She shook her head. No human gun. But I have this. From under her cloak, she produced a short, curved blade with a handle wrapped in leather. The edge caught the light with a faint blue sheen, probably alloyed with some thallow metal Daniel didn't recognize. All right, he said. You take point and close. I'll cover at range. Before they could move, the sound came, faint, almost lost under the creak of the cabin walls. A soft crunch. Footsteps in snow, measured and deliberate. Sarathil's ears flicked toward the door. She motioned for the children to stay silent, then slipped toward the far wall where she could watch the entry without being seen. Daniel crouched by the window and eased the curtain back a fraction. A tall, fur-clad figure stood 20 meters away, partly hidden by a drift. The hood obscured its face, but the silhouette was unmistakable, thallow. It held a long spear-like weapon, the kind their hunters favored. A second figure moved in the tree line, circling. Daniel's gut tightened. They weren't making an approach. They were watching, measuring. They'll wait for night, Sarathil whispered from across the room. Harder to see them. Easier to take us. He nodded. Then we're leaving now. Within minutes, they had the children bundled and ready. Daniel shut down the heater and slung his pack over his shoulder. He opened the re-service hatch, a narrow exit meant for maintenance, and ushered them out into the blinding light. The air hit him like knives. His breath crystallized instantly, curling into glittering vapor before the wind shredded it away. They kept low, moving behind the cabin toward a ridge line that led south. Daniel kept one hand on the rifle, eyes scanning for movement. He knew the trackers could follow their scent, but breaking line of sight was their first priority. For the first half-kilometer, they saw nothing. Then Risha stumbled, and Daniel caught her before she hit the snow. She was shivering hard, her claws digging into his sleeve. Sarathil lifted her without breaking stride. Daniel took the boy's hand and pushed on. A faint whistle cut through the wind. Not human, not natural. Daniel spun, raising the rifle. A shadow flitted between snow mounds 50 meters back. They've spotted us, he said. Sarathil didn't answer, just quickened her pace. The ridge dipped into a shallow gully. Daniel led them down, boots crunching in the snow. The terrain gave them cover, but it also funneled them into a choke point. If the trackers knew the land, and they did, they might already be waiting ahead. At the far end of the gully, a stand of frozen pines loomed. Daniel motioned for them to stop. We need to listen. The children were silent, eyes wide. The only sound was the wind. Then, crunch. Ahead, behind the trees. Another set of footsteps, closing in. They are trying to hurt us, Daniel muttered. Sarathil's grip tightened on her blade. We break through. Fast. Daniel slung the rifle forward. On 3. 1, 2. A dark shape burst from the tree line, taller than Daniel, armored in lead, fur, and bone plates, spear raised. Behind it, another figure moved to flank. Daniel fired. The shot cracked through the cold, the slug tearing a furrow in the snow at the attacker's feet. The figure froze, snarling in its native tongue. Go! Daniel shouted. Sarathil darted forward, her children clinging to her sides. Daniel backed after them, keeping the rifle up, covering their retreat. The trackers didn't follow into the open, not yet. But their eyes stayed fixed on him, and he knew this wasn't over. When they finally crested the ridge, Daniel risked a look back. The two figures stood in the gully, spears planted in the snow, watching, waiting. He felt the weight of their patience like a physical thing. "They'll come again," Saithil said, her breath steaming. "Yeah," Daniel replied, "which means we keep moving, and we don't stop until we're somewhere they can't follow." The journey through ice. The ridge fell away into a broad sweep of frozen tundra, unbroken except for jagged ice spires thrusting from the ground like the teeth of some ancient beast. The wind here was wise, constant, needling, loud enough to drown out thought. Daniel pulled his scarf tighter, checked the seals on the children's hoods. He could feel the cold already working its way into his joints. They had to keep moving. Saithil led the way, her long stride cutting a path through snowdrifts that came up to Daniel's knees. Tovin clung to her back, his small arms hooked around her neck. Risha trudged beside Daniel, determined but shivering. "How far to the next ridge?" he called over the wind. Saithil tilted her head toward the southeast. 2, maybe 3 kilometers. Daniel grimaced. "Out here, that distance might as well be 30. The snow underfoot shifted treacherously, hiding dips and jagged ice. He kept his rifle slung, one hand free to catch Risha if she stumbled. After an hour, they found a shallow overhang in the lee of a rock outcrop, just enough shelter to take a short break. Daniel got the portable heater running, a weak orange glow flickering against the stone. Risha and Tovin huddled close, hands outstretched. Saithil crouched beside them, her breath coming fast but steady. She seemed tireless, but Daniel noticed the frost clinging to her fur and the way her claws flexed involuntarily. He dug in his pack and handed her a ration bar. "You need the calories," he said. She sniffed it suspiciously before biting off a corner. Her expression shifted, whiskers twitching. "Sweet. Too sweet." "It's synthetic fruit flavor," Daniel said. "Keeps the kids from spitting it out." That earned a small, brief sound from her. Not quite a laugh, but close enough. For a moment, the wind seemed less oppressive. But the respite didn't last. A low, distant howl rose from somewhere to the west. Not the wind. Daniel froze. Saithil's ears flattened. "Snow lurkers," she said. Daniel had only seen one once. A predator built like a wolf but larger, with pale, nearly invisible fur. They hunted in packs, silent until the kill was close. "They don't usually attack groups," he said. "They will if hungry," Saithil replied, eyes narrowing. "We move. Now." They pushed on, following the curve of the ridge until the tundra gave way to a field of broken ice. The terrain forced them into single file, weaving between jagged shards. Daniel's boots slipped more than once, the cold biting through to his toes. A shape moved in his peripheral vision, there and gone. He spun, scanning the snow. "Nothing." "Daniel," Saithil said sharply. "Keep up." They emerged onto a frozen river, the ice clear enough in places to see black water swirling beneath. Every step groaned. Daniel guided Risha to step where his boots landed, testing each patch before putting weight on it. Halfway across, a shadow skimmed under the ice, just out of reach of the current's pull. Daniel's pulse spiked. "Don't stop. Don't look down." The far bank rose in a steep incline. Saithil climbed first, hauling Tovin up ahead of her. Daniel boosted Risha, then scrambled up himself, boots slipping on the icy slope. Only once they were on solid ground did he allow himself to look back. The river lay still and silent, the shadow gone. They didn't speak of it. By late afternoon, the light began to fade. Not that there had been much to begin with. Daniel scanned the horizon for anything resembling shelter. His eyes caught on a cluster of low shapes half buried in snow. "Old supply huts," he said, "from the survey teams." They were small prefab domes, abandoned years ago when the mining crews moved farther south. Most were collapsed under the weight of snow, but one still stood, leaning slightly. Inside, it was barely warmer than outside, but the walls blocked the wind. Daniel set the heater in the center while Saithil checked the corners for signs of infestation. The children sat together, too tired to eat much. Saithil brushed frost from their faces, murmuring in her language. The cadence was softer than Daniel had heard before, almost like singing. He busied himself with repairs, sealing a gap in the hut's wall with thermal tape. checking the heater's fuel level. Every so often, he caught Heartfelt watching him, not with suspicion anymore, but with a kind of measured curiosity. "You fix many things," she said finally. "Occupational hazard," he replied. "If something breaks out here, you either fix it or freeze." She considered that. Humans make much from little. Good skill. He shrugged, uncomfortable under the praise. "It's just what we do." She tilted her head, studying him. Not just do. Survive. Protect. Daniel had no answer for that, so he focused on loading the rifle. The wind picked up again after nightfall, rattling the hut's thin walls. Somewhere in the dark, far enough to be uncertain, came another howl. Daniel took first watch. He sat by the narrow viewport, scanning the white expanse. In the dim glow of the heater, Heartfelt curled around her children, her breathing slow and even. Risha's hand rested on her mother's arm. Tobin's head was tucked under her chin. Daniel found himself wondering how long they'd been running before they reached his door. How many nights they'd spent in the cold without shelter. How many times those little hands had clutched at nothing, searching for safety. A flicker of movement outside pulled him back to the present. Just a swirl of snow. Or something else. He tightened his grip on the rifle and kept watching. Morning would come, and with it, the trackers. And maybe Weiss. But for tonight, they were alive, and the heaters still burned. Trials of survival. The fuel gauge was lying to him. Daniel realized it when the hauler sputtered halfway up a frozen incline, its engine coughing like it had swallowed ice. He coaxed it forward another 10 meters before it gave up entirely, shuddering to silence. The sudden absence of noise made the cold seem louder. Heartfelt stepped down from the rear, her children still bundled in the insulated compartment. Her breath plumed white in the wind. "Why stop?" "We're out," Daniel said flatly, kicking the track treads. "Fuel lines bone dry. Must have been leaking since yesterday." Her ears twitched. "We walk, then." Daniel glanced south. The horizon was an unbroken sweep of white, the low sun smearing the snowfields in shades of gray. "It's 30 kilometers to the nearest human outpost. With this wind, we won't make half that before dark." Heartfelt didn't flinch. "Then we find shelter. Not road. Land." She was right. The open tundra was a death sentence after sundown. Daniel dug out the emergency sled, a flat, low hauler board meant for short drags, and lashed the children's compartment to it. Heartfelt took the front harness without argument. Daniel tried to protest, but she shook her head. "You watch behind. I pull." They set off at an angle, using the wind to push against their backs. The ground rolled in shallow waves, patches of wind-scoured ice gleaming like glass between the drifts. Daniel kept scanning for movement, half expecting the shadow of a tracker to appear on the horizon. By midday, the cold had sharpened to a knife edge. The children huddled together under the sled's canopy, silent except for the occasional muffled cough. Heartfelt's pace never faltered, though Daniel could see the frost building on her whiskers and the stiffness in her gait. When the light began to dim, Daniel spotted a rise ahead. Not rock, but ice piled by wind into a natural mound. At its base, a dark slit broke the surface. "Cave!" he shouted over the wind. They reached it just as the first needles of frozen sleet began to sting their faces. The entrance was narrow, forcing them to duck, but inside the walls widened into a shallow chamber, protected from the wind. Daniel set the portable heater in the center and powered it on low, conserving what little energy remained. The air warmed slowly, more psychological comfort than true heat. The children fell asleep quickly, curled together under the thermal blankets. Heartfelt sat beside them, flexing her claws to restore circulation. Daniel checked the heater. "We've got maybe 8 hours of burn before the cells are dead. After that, it's body heat." Heartfelt's amber eyes flicked to him. "Then we shared." He hesitated. "You mean all of us, together?" "Yes," she said simply, as if there was nothing strange about it. "Close contact keeps heat. You know this." He did. Cold weather survival drills on Earth had hammered that lesson in, skin to skin, minimal air gaps, sharing every scrap of warmth. It was practical, logical, and yet, looking at her now, he felt a different kind of tension settle in his chest. They ate a cold ration meal in silence. When the heater's glow began to dim, Saithil shifted closer to the children, then looked up at him. "You come too, Daniel." He moved to the blankets, sliding in beside them. Saithil's fur was dense and warm, a barrier against the chill that seeped through his clothes. Her shoulder pressed into his, her breathing deep and steady. Rish's small hand found his wrist and didn't let go. For the first time in days, he felt something more than just the grind of survival. After a while, Saithil spoke, her voice low. "Your people, you live far apart. In clans." "Not clans," Daniel said. "Families. Friends. We choose who we keep close." She considered that. "Then I understand why you help." He turned his head slightly to look at her. "You think I'm helping because I chose you?" Her whiskers twitched. "Yes, and because you are not like Thalari males." Daniel wasn't sure how to take that. That a compliment? Yes. She didn't elaborate. The wind howled outside, rattling eyes from the cave mouth. Daniel's eyes drifted shut despite himself, lulled by the warmth pressed against him. For a moment, it didn't matter that trackers could be anywhere out there. The only reality was the heat they shared, the steady breathing of the three lives depending on him. He woke to silence. The wind had stopped, but the cave was colder. The heater had died in the night. A faint, pale light filtered in through the entrance. Saithil was already awake, watching him. Storm passed. "We go now." Daniel sat up, flexing numb fingers. "How far can we push today?" "Far," she said, "before they find us again." He packed quickly, knowing their margin for safety was shrinking with every step. The hauler sled was heavier now, the cold tightening every strap. But when they emerged onto the open tundra, the air was eerily still, no wind, no movement. They made good time for hours, the silence broken only by the crunch of boots and claws in snow. Yet Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that they were being shadowed. Near midday, his suspicion proved right. A single dark figure appeared far behind them on the horizon, too far to make out details, but close enough that Daniel's gut tightened. "They found us," he said. Saithil didn't look back. "Then we go faster." And they did. Not because they thought they could outrun the cold, but because they knew they couldn't afford to let the clan's shadow catch up again. The pass of no return. The mountains rose from the tundra like black teeth, their jagged ridges clawing at the pale sky. Somewhere beyond them lay the human capital, and safety. But the only way through was the Icefang Pass, a narrow corridor carved by centuries of wind and meltwater, flanked by sheer cliffs. Daniel hated it instantly. A bottleneck was an ambush's dream. Saithil stopped beside him, her breath pluming in short bursts. "Once we enter, there is no turning." "Yeah," Daniel said, scanning the shadows in the rock. "I noticed." The sled was lighter now, food almost gone, water low. But the children were exhausted, their eyes half-lidded even as they clung to the blanket. Daniel knew they couldn't keep this pace much longer. They were 20 meters into the pass when a sound like stone cracking echoed from ahead. Saithil froze, ears flattening. "Trap!" Daniel's instinct screamed at him a split second before movement erupted above them. Figures dropping from the cliff ledges, their shapes lean and predatory. Tracker warriors. There were 6 of them, armed with hook spears and clawed gauntlets, their eyes gleaming in the dim light. The leader stepped forward, his fur striped in black and silver. His gaze locked on Saithil with an intensity that made the air feel colder. "You've run far enough, widow," he said in their native tongue. His voice carried no anger, only certainty. "Come home. The kits belong to the clan." Saithil stepped in front of the sled, her claws sliding free. "The clan is dead to me." The leader's gaze flicked to Daniel. "And the human, you let an alien male touch your bloodline." Daniel didn't like the way the others shifted their weight, preparing to surround them. He stepped forward deliberately, placing himself between the trackers and the children. "She's not going anywhere with you." The leader tilted his head. "You will die for her." Daniel gave a short, humorless laugh. "You're assuming I haven't been planning on killing you since I saw your ugly face." That was all it took. The leader lunged, hook spear sweeping in a blade. Daniel ducked and grabbed the haft, yanking hard. The weapon came free, but the move left him exposed to the others. Heartfelt moved like lightning, her claws raking across the throat of the nearest tracker. The warrior dropped soundlessly into the snow. The pass exploded into chaos. Daniel fought with desperation, using the spear like a quarterstaff, jabbing to keep the trackers at bay. Two came at him together, one high, one low. He sidestepped, letting the lower one overextend, then smashed the butt of the spear into his ribs. The crack of bone was satisfying. Behind him, Heartfelt was a blur of fur and steel, every slash of her claws precise, economical. She fought like someone who had done this before, not for glory, but survival. A sharp cry made Daniel's head snap toward the sled. One of the trackers had broken through, yanking at the canopy. The children screamed. Daniel didn't think. He hurled the spear with all his strength. It slammed into the attacker's side, sending him sprawling into the snow. Before the tracker could rise, Daniel was on him, driving his knee into the alien's chest and wrenching the spear free. When he turned back, there were only two trackers still standing, the leader and one more at his flank. The others lay bleeding in the snow. The leader's expression was unreadable as he stepped forward. "You fight well, human, but strength cannot change blood." Heartfelt spat into the snow. "Blood does not bind me to cowards." The leader's eyes narrowed. Then, without warning, he charged. Daniel braced, but the impact drove him back a step, spear locked against hook spear. The leader's weight was immense, his strength animal. The metal edges ground together, sparks snapping in the cold air. Out of the corner of his eye, Daniel saw Heartfelt vault onto the rock wall, using the cliff for leverage. She came down hard on the leader's back, claws sinking deep. The alien roared in pain, staggering. Daniel didn't hesitate. He drove the spearhead forward, the point punching through armor and into the leader's chest. The roar turned into a wet gasp. The tracker sagged to his knees, eyes wide with disbelief, before crumpling into the snow. Silence filled the pass. The last tracker dropped his weapon and fled, his steps echoing down the corridor until they faded entirely. Daniel leaned on the spear, catching his breath. His arms ached, and his chest felt like it had been pounded with a sledgehammer. "You okay?" he asked, turning to Heartfelt. She wiped blood from her muzzle and nodded. "Yes, but we must go. Others may follow." They dragged the bodies to the side, covering them with snow. Daniel didn't know if it was out of respect or just to hide the fight from any pursuers, but either way, it made sense. When they finally cleared the pass, the land beyond was a shock. A wide, open valley, sunlight glinting off patches of green. In the far distance, faint plumes of smoke marked the human capital. Daniel stopped, feeling something he hadn't in days: hope. Heartfelt stood beside him, the children leaning out from the sled to stare. "Safe?" she asked. "Not yet," Daniel said, tightening his grip on the sled rope. "But close." They started down the slope together, side by side. Behind them, the pass lay silent, the snow already beginning to cover the signs of battle. Warmth beyond the cold. The valley stretched before them like a promise, sunlight spilling across the slopes and catching in the ice-fed rivers below. Daniel had forgotten what warmth looked like. For days, the world had been nothing but steel-gray skies and the bite of wind. Now, the air smelled faintly of thawing earth. They had walked for hours, the human city growing from a smudge on the horizon to a cluster of walls and towers. The smoke rising from its chimneys was steady and calm, not the black plumes of war Daniel had learned to fear. The children stirred, little heads lifting under the sled's worn blanket. Heartfelt murmured something soft in her own language, stroking their fur. They settled again, though their eyes never left the growing silhouette of the city. "You ever been to a human settlement before?" Daniel asked. Heartfelt shook her head. "Only in stories. In the stories, humans are either saviors or conquerors." Daniel chuckled without humor. "Sounds about right." By midday, the road widened and they were no longer alone. Merchants and travelers appeared in the distance, some leading carts, others riding shaggy pack beasts. A few slowed to stare openly at Sarthil and the children, their expressions shifting between curiosity and suspicion. Daniel caught every glance, every too long look. When they reached the outer gates, the guards stiffened. Two in steel-plated coats stepped forward, rifles slung but ready. "State your business," one said. His gaze moved to Sarthil and lingered. "And explain them." Daniel's jaw tightened. "Refugees. We're here to get them safe." The guard frowned. "You know the quarantine rules. No alien entry without clearance." Sarthil's ears flicked back, but she kept still. Her hands remained visible, her posture calm. Daniel could feel the tension coiling in her. "They're not a threat," Daniel said flatly. "If they were, I'd be dead already." The other guard stepped closer, voice low. "That's not your call." Daniel's hand drifted toward the spear strapped to his back, but Sarthil touched his arm. A small, deliberate shake of her head. Her eyes told him what she wasn't saying aloud. "Do not fight here." He exhaled slowly. "Fine. Call the quarantine officer. I'll vouch for them." It took the better part of an hour. They were led into a holding yard, the high walls shadowing them from the rest of the city. The quarantine officer, a sharp-eyed woman in a long coat, arrived with a small team carrying scanners. She examined Sarthil and the children carefully, her face unreadable. No signs of infection, no dangerous biomards, the officer concluded. But policy's policy. They'll need sponsorship to stay. "And you?" She looked at Daniel. "You sure you want to tie your name to them?" Daniel didn't hesitate. "Yes." Sarthil's ears lifted slightly, but her expression remained neutral. The officer gave a short nod. "Then it's on you. If anything goes wrong, it's your head." Papers were signed, data stamps applied, and the gate finally opened to them. The city's sounds washed over Daniel. The calls of vendors, the creak of wagon wheels, the chatter of passers-by. After weeks of emptiness, the noise felt almost overwhelming. The children clung close to Sarthil, their eyes darting everywhere. Humans stared openly now, some whispering behind hands. Daniel caught a few hostile looks and made sure his hands stayed near the spear. They found a small inn near the quieter edge of the city. The innkeeper hesitated, then agreed to rent them a room after Daniel paid in advance. It wasn't much, one bed, a wash basin, and a shuttered window. But it was warm. The moment the door closed, the children collapsed onto the bed, curling together under the blanket. Sarthil knelt beside them, brushing their fur until their breathing slowed. Only then did she straighten and face Daniel. "You did not have to sponsor us," she said quietly. Daniel leaned against the wall. "Yeah, I did." She studied him for a long moment. "Why?" He shrugged. "Because I've seen what happens when someone needs help and doesn't get it. I'm not letting that happen to you." Something in her gaze softened, though her voice stayed steady. "And what happens now?" "That's up to you," Daniel said. "You could stay here, start over, or you could come with me." Sarthil looked toward the bed, where her children slept, then back at him. "My people are gone. My world is gone. But," she hesitated, "you fought for us as if you were one of us. I do not forget that." Daniel felt a small smile tug at the corner of his mouth. "So that's a yes." Her answer was a slow, deliberate nod. They shared the first real meal in weeks that night. Bread still warm from the oven, a stew rich with meat and herbs. The children ate in silence at first, then began to whisper to each other, tails twitching in small, unguarded moments of contentment. Later, as the city quieted and the lamps in the street dimmed, Daniel sat at the window, looking out at the rooftops. The cold still lingered in the night air, but inside, the room held a different kind of warmth. Sarthil moved quietly to his side. "You still do not trust this place." Daniel's eyes scanned the streets. "Trust isn't the word, but I'll sleep better knowing you and the kids are behind a locked door." She was silent for a moment, then said, "You will not always be able to guard us." Daniel turned to meet her gaze. "Then I'll make damn sure you can guard yourselves." Her ears angled forward, a gesture he'd learned meant approval. "I would like that." For a while, they stood there in companionable silence, the city breathing quietly around them. When Daniel finally stretched out on the floor beside the bed, The blankets rustled. A moment later, Saarthil lay down as well, the children between them. The last thing Daniel remembered before sleep claimed him was her voice, low and certain. "I will keep you warm, human." And for the first time since the frozen wilds, he believed her.